you. Okay. One of the things that I try with my students is to keep the catch cry going, to go back to some basic things and to keep their attention. So my kids know this as the F rule. And they know it because it gets their attention quite quickly. And it pulls back to facts, not fluff, gets you 5. And part of this is keeping them on task. In a 5-mark question with only 15 lines and not necessarily a lot of time, they need to ensure that they're not packing their answer with anything that isn't needed. Every sentence has to be valuable. Every sentence has to make a part of that answer and thereby achieve a mark. So why won't my little screen move to the next one? The second key that I use and I write on the board almost every lesson is RTQ, ATQ. There's no magic formula for any of these questions. They have to read the question. They have to read it very, very carefully. They have to ensure they hit the verb in the question and the content in the question. Then they have to answer the question. I've sat in the marking center before and I've read 8-page essays on Hajj that are well planned and well executed that don't answer the question. The first bit does and the last bit does. They top and tail. And I've read questions that are 4 pages long and grapple with the core content, grapple with what the verb is asking them for and get better marks. So remembering that they have to read the question, they have to actually answer the question. I don't know why this, oh, there you go. So a 5-mark question, 20% of a 2-unit paper or 20% of a 1-unit paper for that matter is 5 marks. And that's me counting the 2 5-mark sections within section 2. Generally, they're kind of going to 2, 5, 8 at the moment. They probably won't go over 8. They might, but it's unlikely. But every question that's got 5 marks to it, you get 15 lines and you get a limited time span to write in. So there's parts to the question, the stimulus which you cannot ever ignore. And part of remembering, even if it doesn't say, make reference to the statement, you have to drum into them, they have to make reference to this statement. And it's one of the things the board does, which is really annoying. It just ignores the stimulus quote, but the kids can't afford to do that. The question then has 2 parts. It has the verb and it has the content. What's the actual thing that they're wanting the content to be about? And then how does that link straight back to the stimulus? So what I get my kids to do is to go through and read both stimulus and question and work out which dot point it directly relates to. So they have to know the dot points and know which one that they need to be talking about. So if I click, if we take last year's HSC, the mother is the land and we are of the land. We do not own the land, rather the land owns us. Why is the land important in Aboriginal spirituality? Doesn't say you have to make reference to the statement, but if you don't, you wouldn't have got over 3. So they have to know the syllabus dot point that this directly relates to. And particularly for post 45, they've got to know their syllabus backwards. They've got to know exactly where it hits. So it sits here in obligation to land, but what it goes with is ceremonial life and kinship. So then I'd come back and say, you have to mention all 3 of those things. Okay, it's a bit like having a spotlight. Your spotlight goes on obligation to land, but you have to also run past the way ceremony works and the way kinship works, because you can't look at Aboriginal spirituality in one element in isolation. It has to flow together. Okay, any living religion must work hand in hand with its practice, with its beliefs, with its with its personal behavior, and how it goes around in that cyclic motion. You can't just take one element and highlight it. So even though this obligation to land bit goes here, ceremony and kinship are just as important. So I get my kids to go through and go, right, why? I need to give reasons. Land is mother, so mother is relationship. Where am I going to fit kinship in with that? We don't own the land. That brings us straight into obligation to land. The land owns us. So therefore we have some obligation to that land, and we do that in ceremony. So I kind of get them to do that, to pull apart instantly what they have to write about. So there's 3 things in that they can write about. So they shouldn't have fluff. There should be 3 distinct parts that they can write about that answer the question and that bring in the quote. So I don't know why this doesn't want it. In terms of fluff, I will often get them to practice they've got set pages with 15 lines, and I will go through with a whiteboard marker. I'm horrible and mean. And I will cross out every piece of fluff. Okay. And when they start coming up with stuff where it doesn't make any sense, it's just an introduction. So land is important to Aboriginal people. Yep, you need much more than that. That is fluff. Okay. How do I make it from fluff into fact? I need to add to it, but I can't just start with fluff. I have to get straight to the point. So the very first thing I have to do is answer the question directly. And land, kinship, identity. So I'm pulling all three concepts together straight away. Steadfastly connected to Aboriginal spirituality. Without the land, now I can't see the rest of that because of your little faces, so I don't know how to fix that. The land of the ancestors, spirits, the place of ceremony, the something mother, the source of relationship, the dreaming. Aboriginal spirituality cannot endure. So they should be able to answer that question in a short amount of time. Then they can sit and pull each element apart. So they haven't started with fluff. And when they do start with fluff, you go through with a whiteboard marker and you go, yeah, this is fluff, this is fluff, this is fluff. You now have 5 extra lines where you could write logical stuff, okay? Because you're being wishy-washy and pretty much being, in some ways, trying to give the question context. At 5 marks, you don't need a lot of context. You need direct example. If they start restating the question or restating the whole of the quote, get rid of that. Okay, it seems mean and nasty, but it's actually teaching them they've got 5 more lines, 3 more lines, 2 more lines to write content. And that content gets the marks. So getting straight to the point, not waffling, not giving too much context. Answer the question directly in the first sentence, not restating the quote. Never, never, never let them restate the quote. So you need to use the quote in context, and I've got mother there as a source, and I get them to either put it in inverted commas or underline it to demonstrate that it's part of the quote and it is used in context as opposed to writing as the quote says. So again, cross out that bit. After a while, they start to get the idea and they start to go, okay, don't need to say that, don't need to say that, don't need to say that. And actually surprises them how direct they can be. They can actually be really direct. And once they've done that, they've only used 5 or 7 lines and they can keep writing and write a whole second section that will make sure that they get that 5 marks straight down. So when we go through facts, not fluff, what's a fact? And I get them to go through what's a fact. Dates, names, events, examples, places. When we're talking about the parts within section 2, for example, a scripture reference or a text or a quote, census statistics, and I know last year's HSC, I think it was question 11, question 2, if you didn't, question 22 I think it was, if you didn't use census stats, you didn't get above a 3, if you didn't actually have some kind of census statistics in there. Using an artwork, we encourage our kids to know particular land rights claims. So know what one of the land rights claims was and get them to learn how to spell it. So they can actually, it actually works in a variety of situations, but it can actually make a logical and current reference to something, which shows that they know what's going on. An organisation and naming that organisation properly, not just referring to it in general, but physically naming that organisation, putting it in capitals and making sure it's in inverted commas if you need to. A specific practice. So it might be about balance rights, or it might be about initiation rights. So don't just put it in the context of the sentence. Make the point that you're talking about something in particular. So within the Camaragal people's balance rights, within the Camaragal people's initiation rights, make it really specific. And that changes fluff into fact, because you've got a distinct name to it. It's like changing it from bridge to the harbour bridge. You've got a specific thing in it. Talking about an ethic, talking about terminology and principal beliefs. And that's, again, goes into the list they use when they're talking about 5 markers in section 2. Okay. Are there any questions at this point, or should I soldier on?
Hi, Christina. We've got a question from Antoinette asking, is an example of a land rights claim from a regional area, for example, the south coast of New South Wales, or is that too obscure for the markers?
You can name it, and the joy of the markers is in computers. If we're not sure about it, we just Google it. We've never had that in the past. And I think it puts the impetus on the kids even more to know particular land rights claims and particularly how to spell those places. it gives it just a bit more power behind it. There's one a few came out, I think early this year, that had taken 27 years to claim. And that kind of gives you two facts. This land claim took 27 years, but here it is now. These people are now have access to this land and can therefore have ceremony on this land, have obligation to this land, can walk this land, can conduct ceremony, can start to rebuild some kind of kinship structure on that land. So it doesn't matter how far flung outside of Sydney is, so long as it's accurate. Is that okay? I'm just going to go with yes and keep moving. Is that all right? Okay. So when it comes to the examples, a lot of times the kids go, well, how do I build in the example? Am I going to waste a line saying, you know, an example of a land rights claim might be, and again, they're wasting half a line when they don't need to be. So be really straightforward in it. So, for example, this land rights claim taking 27 years is an example of, okay? This is seen in, this is exemplified in, this is evident in. And it just gets them into a writing pattern of not wasting time fluffing around and having to you know, having to find a way to introduce their example. Okay, 5 markers don't need that much context. They need exact answers. So trying to build context into it, which is what they're trying to do. And they're trying to write part of an essay when they don't need to. They need to be really direct. So going with something really, really simple. Okay, this is an example of, this is seen in, this is evident in. And going through and crossing out the fluff between the concept and the example. Just cross it out. So it just leads from content straight to example. They don't have time then to wait. Also, you have room to go back and do something a bit more logical. What have I got? So I sat my kids down and I sat and wrote some things, and we tried to put this together. We tried to take out every element of fluff that there is. So, I mean, I just want to pull it apart a little bit as we go. So we've got the sentence that I started with. Land, kinship and identity are steadfastly connected. I know the syllabus says inextricably, but most kids struggle to spell inextricably, and every marker reads it. If your kids can be different, if you can find ways to say things differently, inextricable is the syllabus, and if it's needed, it's needed. But there are other ways of saying it. If you instantly write inextricable, you're as boring as the child before you. So try to be a bit different. Steadfastly connected with Aboriginal spirituality. So in this, we always say Aboriginal spirituality. We never say culture. The question doesn't ask about culture. Okay, it has to be dead on what the question's asking. Without the land of ancestor spirits and the place of ceremony, the place of mother, the source of relationship, the dreaming, Aboriginal spirituality cannot endure. Okay, so there's nothing in that you could take out. We've tried. So even though we've got the land twice, we've still got the land of the ancestor spirit. So we've got terminology in it in the first 3 lines. Ancestor spirit, ceremony, we've got the source, mother, we've got the dreaming, and we've got Aboriginal spirituality twice. And we've got a why twice. It cannot endure, and it's steadfastly connected. Okay, so we're trying to do that. The depth of relationship between Aboriginal people and their land is often called connection with country. Now, we argued a little bit connection to country, connection with country, but I think connection with country works better. So then we have an exact quote from somebody, and I'll get to that in a minute when we talk about what we bring to the question. So we've got Patrick Dodson, a Yurura man from Broome. So I've got the name of the nation and then the location. So I've got Yurura and Broome. I belong to the land, I rest in it. I come from there. Land provides me with physical needs and provides for my spiritual needs. Now, I would make the argument you could use half of that. You wouldn't need all of it. But I put the whole quote in for us to give it some context, and I put the little dots in between. I think you could use either side of it. I don't necessarily need both. This connection is vital. Again, we've got a reason, a why. It's vital. For example, meeting obligation to land. Okay, so instead of saying this connection is vital in meeting obligation to land, we've said, for example. So we're demonstrating that obligation to land is part of an example, rather than saying, yep, we know the syllabus and we've just written obligation to land. Elders are obliged to walk the land each year, to perform balance rites where needed, and to pay respect to the ancestor beings, These core elements, so we're giving a value, of Aboriginal spirituality cannot be fulfilled if they are dispossessed of the land. Hence, the land is of intrinsic importance to Aboriginal spirituality. So we've tried to follow through and connect. Now, the sentence is long, but it still works. Okay, and you've got the kids kind of got a momentum going. Okay, that they've built in. I find when they start ending sentences and trying to come up with something new to say, they get a bit bamboozled. So let's just keep going. Therefore, what? Where are you getting to? Where's the answer you're trying to get? You're trying to get why is important. So keep going back to the why. As the quote states, so really simple, as the quote states, rather than them, again, trying to grapple with, well, how do I build in the quote? Just be direct. Just say it as it is. We do not own the land. The connection is spiritual and far-reaching. So through the land, Aboriginal people are connected to flora, fauna, ancestors, landforms, and people. And again, we've got totems and relationships are found within this land. The land as mother, provider, nurturer, comforter are all part of Aboriginal spirituality. They are passed on in ceremony, told in story, and lived in the dreaming. Okay, so again, we couldn't work out any of those that we could take out. We made a list. No, they all work. Flora, fauna, ancestor, landforms, but totems is more than flora and fauna. Totems is flora and fauna with a meaningful relationship to a particular person and a particular nation. So it needs to go in there as well as flora and fauna. Okay, relationship all found within this land, not any land, not the land, this land. It's connected to this land. The land as mother, provider, nurturer, comforter are all part of spirituality. And then connect back into ceremony and then connect back into dreaming. So we know where we're going. The answer's gone around in a circle. Okay, it's actually tried to connect to every element of what is there. So if I can just jump back here, it's got the stimulus in it. It's got the verb, and it's got the content that needs to be covered in the dot point. Okay, it's got kinship, it's got ceremony, and it focuses more than anything though on obligation to land. It's not a perfect answer. No answers are always perfect. It's just trying to demonstrate that you can have pure content and as little fluff as possible, as little extraneous material as possible. Are there any questions there, Michael, when I go back and find my place?
We're all good for the moment. If you do have a question, folks, can I ask you to use the chat function in the bottom centre of your screen? We've already had a couple of questions through there, and we'll relay them to Christina as we go.
Okay. So how are we going? When it comes to incorporating the quote, they have this drummed into them. Incorporate the quote. You notice that I've only used one word of the quote in this particular answer. I've used the word mother and I've used it twice. I haven't connected any other part of the quote. What we have tried to do, or I have tried to do, is incorporate the sentiment of the quote. Okay, so the sentiment of the quote is still part of that answer, it's part of that response. And it does physically say, you know, as the quote states. So they're going to get their marks in terms of that. Okay, in terms of the band 6 and the band 5s, unless you make reference to the quote, you won't get there, but you've already made reference twice within this and physically stated you're talking about it. You've got we don't own the land, but you're connecting back to that mother phrase. And that connects in the syllabus part really well. So not repeating it word for word, okay? I use 6 words in a row. We do not own the land. That's the most I've used. You use it to demonstrate the point. So you incorporate it within the text of what you're saying. You use it in context. In this essence, I've tried to get the sentiment of the quote, that the land is there to guide, to be there for us, to be that mother figure. And we all know that mothers don't just give of the physical, they give of their whole heart, their whole selves. And that's what land is like for Aboriginal people. Look at the author and see if that's relevant to mention. I didn't find this one particularly relevant, but if you're looking at the land rights question, for example, who said that? May well be relevant and may well help you with an example of some kind and may well give you a way into, well, how do I get the most out of this quote? So if the quote's from a particular elder who's had a particular connection to land rights, or it's from the Mabo decision, or it's from the Native Title Act, use a few words that connect the meaning of it rather than writing out the whole quote. And unfortunately, it often makes them feel better. If I write out the quote, then I've written something on the page and I feel a bit better and I'm trying to get somewhere. Instead of that, learning the dot points and learning how to make the dot points into sentences and thereby covering the content rather than repeating what's already on their page, adding to it, is what they need to be doing. So incorporating that quote is really important, even particularly when it says don't. When it doesn't say whether you have to or not, always do it. Always, always, always. So what's the next thing I teach? I teach some don'ts. What are some don'ts? Don't be repetitive. And then I went back through that answer this afternoon and I tried to find any place where I said the same thing twice. Sometimes there's a list of things, but never a repetition of that list. Not writing out the whole quote, not being too controversial. They haven't got the time and the space to give a real argument about land rights, for an example, and how, you know, really weak they are right now, and how, you know, there is a real argument out there that says we need to start relooking at how the Native Title Act works and whether we're actually living up to any of the obligations of the apology. But this is not the time and place to do that because they haven't got the space. It's a valid argument to be had, but not necessarily here and now. So being controversial in that isn't going to help them because they don't have the time and the space to articulate that argument. Don't skip a dot point. So if they think, oh, this isn't really that much about ceremonial life, I shouldn't really mention that, put it in anyway. Okay, because it shows you've got a holistic understanding of the dot point, the points within that, that syllabus content point. Don't use just basic terminology. I get my kids to make a list of things. So what do we mean by past, present, future? What do we mean by inextricable? Don't use inextricable, every other child will. Find something else to use. It's like a religion and peace essay. Helen Smith always says, don't ever write, peace is not merely the absence of war. So you need to go beyond that. Find their own way of saying things and their own way of it making sense for them. Don't use old and outdated data. So if they're looking at land claims that were passed in, 2015, 2016, they're too old. If they're looking at examples of things of ecumenism and interfaith dialogue that happened more than 18 months ago, way too old. If they've gone back into the, the early 2000s, they're probably just copying some other kid's notes who did the HSC in, 2004 or 2005. They need to be updated. So you need to make sure that for religion and peace, for anything to do with post-45 and particularly around ecumenical and interfaith, that all their examples are less than 18 months old. Even now, going back to Christchurch is getting a bit old, and the things around Christchurch, when you look at how much has been done around the bushfires and around COVID. So looking at what the response is of ecumenical and interfaith organisations around that. And then a lot of stuff that's coming out now around the Black Lives Matter movement, and making sure that each of those examples is dead on point to something that's happening and relevant now. Don't use waffle. Every sentence needs to have a point, and don't be afraid to say, yep, this sentence has no point. So let's take it out and make it a bit better. Don't be general. Use examples that support the response. So as I said before, saying that a particular person, a particular tribe, a particular nation, a particular language is used. And most of them are easy to find online, and the markers can usually Google them if they're not sure what they are. Okay, so we have those in place, which are my big list of don'ts. What am I up to? So the key mantra that I tend to go along with is read the question, answer the question. So the kids have that buried into their psyche at an early age. Relevant examples, syllabus terminology, using your own material. So when you look at the question that I put up, 2019's question, they have to be able to bring their own material to that. So it's not just what's there that's in the question. So if we jump back here for a sec, it's not just that there's stimulus, there's a verb and there's content. It's what do I bring to that question? What do I know that I can add? How can I value add with what I know? And it's these examples that I'm value adding with. Okay, I know a quote from the Mabo decision. I know a quote from the Native Title Act. I know a quote from the the apology to the stolen generations. So knowing those particular elements helps you to build in what you know and thereby be unique in your response and show the marker that you have got a depth of research and you have got a breadth of knowledge. Reference to the stimulus at least twice in a 5 marker, at least twice. And then responding to the verb in the question. It's no good looking at it going, yep, this is about spirituality. I need to dump everything I know on it, and giving a great response that doesn't answer the question. And I have spent lots of time before writing at the bottom of a paper, yep, this is a great response. It's just a shame it doesn't answer the question. So if it says explain, you need to give me cause and effect. You need to do that. You can't go out on a limb and just describe it. You need to explain it. So what's the cause? What's the effect? Here's 2 markers. Here's 2 highlighters. Show me the cause and show me the effect, 1 in each color. And if they can't do that, then they haven't given you cause and effect. So making them go back and read their answer and be able to interpret their own answer in their own particular responses. Okay. Did I do this? Make each sentence relevant, use samples to support your response. Write a strong concluding statement that links to the question. And we did that with this particular response. We went straight back to dreaming at the end. Okay, so knowing the syllabus, read the question, answer the question. Address the verb, make each sentence count, make reference to the stimulus, use what's there, use examples to support your response, which is your examples, things that you know, things that you're aware of. And then write a strong concluding statement that links to the particular question. Okay, so that's the key that I go on about. And then there's rules within that. So facts not fluff gets you 5 and a few other particular rules. Is there any questions at this point? I've just talked lots of fast. I'm sorry about that.
Thanks, everyone. We might give you just a moment and give you a chance just to process and then to put your questions in. And then in about half a minute, I'll start to throw some of these questions that we've got as they come through at Christina.
Can I phone a friend?
You might be able to.
Do I have friends in the room?
So we've got a question from Antoinette asking Christina, would you recommend students using the teal strategy, or a variation on that might be the peel strategy for writing their paragraphs?
I tend to focus on the peel strategy, but with a 5 marker, I need more than 1 point, but you haven't necessarily got time to write 2 paragraphs. I often teach 5 marker as kind of a structure on its own, rather than a peel paragraph. Most certainly in every other thing, I tend to write peel paragraphs and they get drummed in that way. The good thing about a peel paragraph, you don't have to write it in that order. You can write it in any order you want. You can start with an example and then build into explaining that through to this is the premise of the argument I'm trying to make and this is how it links to the question. So I try to teach 5 markers as their distinct characteristic of a response rather than as a set peel, because they need to make at least 2 valid points, most likely.
Thanks, Christina. A question perhaps just to the side. We've been asked, what are your thoughts on using online learning platforms that already have content and examples such as Atomy?
Yeah, okay. Hands on the table, my kids use a bit of, I think it's called Edmodo, Ed something. I have used Atomy before and I have sat down. I think Atomy is actually started by a group of kids out of Riverview. What I find both those 2 groups have done is spend a lot of time focusing on the new syllabus documents that have been written. And a lot of those new syllabus stuff needed lots and lots of content, and we've pretty much been left behind. I've also taken them to task a couple of times on religion and non-religion. And in religion and non-religion, finding things about new age religions, and you're going, no, new age religion does not belong in religion, non-religion, it belongs in post-45. So don't try to mix the 2 up. They need some good writers, really. They've got a very good basis. And if you follow everything that's there, I tell my kids that that's a good, strong band 4. what those particular things have to offer. But it's really just know the content, tick the box. And at the moment, if we don't actually address the question the paper's asking us, we don't know what they're going to throw at us. They've been throwing a whole bunch of different things lately. Because we don't know what they're going to throw at us, we need to make sure we've got kids that can think critically enough to go, right, this question actually wants me to bring in my knowledge on this and this and this and this. So I pull that together and I get my answer from that, rather than regurgitating information and putting down a set answer on the page. So I don't mind them. They're a way to make sure pre-learning happens. Sometimes I set them as pre-learning. Sometimes I set them as pick the mistakes. But then again, we could do the comprehensive textbook at times too. So I think it's up to us. I think it's up to us as an organisation to make sure that every resource that our kids have is the best that can be found of that particular topic in that particular example.
Thanks, Christina. Just on the point you made there about New Age and religion and non-religion, just to share an experience we had at the Marking Centre some years ago when we had our first ever question 22 about new religious expression. A very large proportion of the state began to write about New Age in response to a question about new religious expression. And there was a lot of discussion amongst the marking group about how much leniency should be shown, given that this was the first time the point had been examined. And the point that was made by one of the senior people in the Marking Centre was that writing about content from post 45 in a question on religion and non-religion deserved the same response as writing about the Buddha in your essay about Christianity. It was a different topic and it didn't belong there.
But that's not necessarily been my reality in the Marking Centre. And it needs to be. It needs to be. I do it with my age. Antoinette and Ada will have to forgive me for this, that I've been 45 for quite a while now. And if it's a new age religion, it goes in 45. If it's got the word age in it, how old's Mrs. Ryan? She's 45. Therefore, it goes in 45. So you write new age in my stuff and you'll get the simple question of how old is Mrs. Ryan? I've been 45 for about 6 years now. Okay, that should have got at least one laugh.
Are there any further questions, folks, that you can drop into the chat box? We've had Kim Murray. Christina has agreed with you about the use of Ed Rollo and about, at times, perhaps getting the students to critique some of that content themselves.
Yeah. Michael, do you want me to do that thing about how I get from fluff to facts?
I think that was a good idea, thanks.
Hi, Christina. Sorry, I had one more question, if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can. How are you?
Hi, good. I'm Sheridan from Newcastle. How are you?
I'm well. I'm well. How can I help?
Just wondering if students can use, I think you mentioned it earlier, but I tapped in a little late. So when you're talking about the issue of dispossession, looking at COVID and current events and even current up until last week, our students go to trial next Thursday. So is that useful? Is that going to be okay?
Absolutely. As current as you can be is great. I sort of give the trials as a bit of a cutoff, and I say, if you're using an example in a trial, by all means keep going and using it in the HSC. My concern is when they use something that's 10 years old or, 14 or 15 years old, and you go, well, why are you using it?
Exactly. It's not relevant because it's not the continuing effect of dispossession.
Exactly.
It's, and like I've said to students, a lot of HSC students get it wrong. They think, what are the effects of dispossession? But the question is, what are the continuing effects?
Yes, that is correct. And that's why their examples need to be relevant. That's why I said, what's a current land rights case? What's something that was, sorted earlier this year? That's current.
Thank you so much.
Yep, that's right. One of the things that I find that some of my students aren't entirely sure about is, way am I going? Is exactly how to get from fluff to facts. So I play a little exercise with them and put this on the board. They can write the kinship is very, and this is just a random question I picked out of something I did the other day with some kids. Discuss the impact that separation from kinship groups has had on Aboriginal spiritualities. So the first thing they have to do is tell me the dot point. Which does this link to? So it links directly to separation, and obviously separation from land, separation from kinship, and the stolen generation. So they have to be able to name all of those things in their answer. So even though it says separation from kinship, the whole dot point is relevant, and it gives them facts they can write about rather than fluffing along. So they'll start with something really simple. Kinship is very important to Aboriginal spirituality. And you kind of nod and smile and go, yep, that's complete fluff though. You've given me nothing specific, okay? You may as well, you know, tell me that chips are really important to a good chicken schnitzel. It doesn't help me. So we try embedded clauses. So I find I put in a space in it, and I say, right, write something in the middle. Kinship, which is intrinsically linked to land and identity, okay, is very important to Aboriginal spirituality. So we're starting to name what it is we're talking about. We're starting to embed the meaning to it. Now, the third one, I must admit, this was a little bit clumsy because I only wrote it an hour or so ago. Separation from kinship groups damages that which gives identity and connection to land, and it has been detrimental to Aboriginal spirituality. So we're building again. If you look through, you can still find the same sentence. You've got kinship, important, and Aboriginal spirituality. But we've started to add the next layer in. So then instead of just separation, we've actually said forced separation. We've been more specific. From kinship groups impacting identity and connection has had a detrimental effect on Aboriginal populations, especially those known as the stolen generation. Okay, so we've built on to the end of it to make sure that we've got each piece of language that we need to have. And so I get them to do this. I take each of the 3 or 4 sentences of fluff that they've written, and I put them at the top of the page, and I say, right, embed clauses that build into this, and keep defining words as you go. Keep adding at the beginning and at the end, add in the middle to start with, and then add at the beginning, then add in the end. And it helps them build up from fluff into fact. You then need to kind of get your answer going from there, but at least it teaches them how to do that part. And if they've taken 4 or 5 statements and built them into that, then they've got those they can sort of use to explain that particular dot point and use to go back to when they're revising and looking at notes and things like that. But that's how I get them from fluff into fact when they say they don't know how. Embedded clauses, beginning and end. Okay, that's kind of all I've got. So if I stop sharing and come back to my smiley faces and all your smiley faces, is there anything else that I can help with?
So at this point, team, feel free either to put it into the chat, or if you'd like to take yourself off mute to ask Christina a question.
You're very welcome, Jane. Oh, I can click on chat. Yeah, Adrolo can be a bit like that. How do you help lazy students who won't do extra research? Give them specific questions and specific things. So find a land rights case that was, settled in the last 12 months. Go through and actually give them the questions they need to go through and find answers. Don't do the work for them. The other thing I use is exit tickets. If you haven't filled in this sheet, you don't get out the door because everything's on their laptops. And it's like, oh yeah, I did it. No, it's an exit ticket. It's a piece of paper. And even though we studied environmental ethics, by the time we get to now, this is exit ticket time. The other thing Miss Ferguson and I, who share a class, have tried is no homework, no entry. If you can't demonstrate that you did this 5-mark question for homework and hand it in, don't try to walk in the door. You'll get sent to the library. So really making sure that they're handwriting, really making sure that they're timing everything that they do. So we won't take essays now that don't have the time it took them to write them at the top.
Annette's asking, where would you recommend finding information about recent land rights claims?
A couple of places have it. What do you call? I'm just trying to think what you call it. Someone else can probably help me out here. There is an organisation, Christy Ferguson will probably know, that does keep a tally of the land rights claims that have been settled, and the ones that are still before the courts. Christy, can you remember what that organisation's called? I will find out and I will put it back on the Facebook page. How does that sound?
That would be good, Christina. We've also had somebody asking, speaking of new religious expressions and using your structure in question 22, what sort of examples would you use for new religious expression?
Look, there's lots of different arguments you can make. At the moment, I think there's a couple of interesting ones out there. I would argue almost at this point the neocats could be used. It's maybe staying away from that little bit of what's controversial and what's not. But you've got to remember, a new religious expression is about a different way of expressing what's going on now. So some of my kids have come up with the argument that the churches that have popped up under COVID and who are now have YouTube channels and are now, you can go onto the Diocese of Wollongong's YouTube channel and find Bishop Brian saying Mass on a Sunday morning. You can subscribe to that channel. You can go back and watch it again and again and again. If you present the argument right, you could make an argument that that's a new religious expression. The way that we're being a part of Mass and a part of Eucharist and a part of community, but we're kind of doing it alone. And then the groups that are coming together and starting to have, the choirs that look like us, the 15 or 20 people who are all singing together, but who are all actually isolated. So there's an argument to be had that that's a new religious expression. Some of the other ones I think come out of America still. You've got some of the more, cult's quite the wrong word, but that some of the more culty ones. You've got some ones around Buddhism that are growing in Australia. So you've got different groups that have started out as yoga type places and Buddhist meditation places and have sort of added a layer of belief to that. And then particularly then once COVID hits, they start to try to reach out and give people something at home that they can connect to, and they can't go out to yoga, but they can start to connect through that. So there are some within the Buddhist community. If you look at community sort of billboards and community places that are, advertising on Facebook and places like that, you start to see what's coming out in those places.
Christina, we've got someone's asking, what would be the time frame cut off, do you think would be relevant for examples in a response?
Past or in terms of if you're looking at religion, non-religion, you're looking at sort of interfaith, you're looking at ecumenism, things like that. I don't really want anything more than about 18 months to 2 years old. Only because it shows they've done their research, it shows they've read what's around and they know what's there. Within Aboriginal spirituality, sometimes that's harder. It depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for a particular example of obligation to land, or a particular example of a balance right, or a particular example of a community being dispossessed people, it's sometimes hard to find relevant examples. So that's why I look to the native title claims that are there, or to those who've made public statements. If it's relevant, I wouldn't go too far back from, say, I mean, even the apology in Kevin Rudd is starting to be quite a while ago. I know Keating was pretty much the battle cry and the call to action, but again, unless you're using it as that example, if you're just quoting it as something to quote, then there's a lot more that's a bit more relevant out there. Some of the stuff around Black Lives Matter and some of the stuff that's come out in, say, journal articles in the last few months, as that movement started to grow, is relevant and can easily be a paragraph of that can be analysed and used as a quote and given a context in a journal article, from a journal article in your question, rather than going back to something that's 6 or 7 years old. So just think about the point you're trying to make. Are you trying to make the point that secularism is growing, therefore you want an example sort of that's going to be after the last census? If you're making a point about the rise of new age religions or things like that, it's the rise, it's current, it's here and now. So going back more than 2 years or so isn't really current, particularly if you look at the way the syllabus is done. Someone's asking about the Uluru Statement. Yeah, the Uluru Statement's useful, and it has some things, but then what statements have come out since then? What particular communities? I mean, without COVID, it's been hard. NAIDOC Week didn't really have a lot of big statements come out of it because there wasn't much going on. So making sure that your example fits the question, making sure you're reading the question, answering the question. Is my example relevant to this question? And is it the most recent example I know that's relevant?
Hi, Christina, it's Sheridan again.
Hey.
Very quick, how in the limited amount of space for a 5-mark question would you reference a podcast, for example?
I'd be really specific. So I would just stick by the name and whoever is the most identifiable name in that podcast. And I would simply say podcast by XYZ called XYZ.
Thank you. And the year, of course.
If you need to, yes. Yep. I mean, podcasts tend to be the here and now. So yeah, if you need to date it, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Christina.
It's the same question we have with Buddhism and how do we put in the Twitter comments from the Dalai Lama. They just need to be that it's Twitter and it's got a specific date and it's from the Dalai Lama.
Christina, there's one they're asking about the possibility of using the push to have changed the incarceration age over the last couple of weeks and months.
Again, you'd need an article, you'd need something from a particular source. So you'd be looking at the Sydney Morning Herald or the Guardian or one of those that's actually got a quote from somebody from a valid source. So as opposed to being wishy-washy about the argument around the incarceration age, let's say in the Guardian on this date, it states. So you're giving it, you're landing it somewhere and you're giving it credibility rather than thinking, I heard about Miss say this in class one day and I think I'll write down something about this because it vaguely sounded like that. If you know you're definite in each statement and you know you've got something to back it up, then you're demonstrating you know your content, and us markers have got to give you 5.
Christina, can I add to that too? If you were looking at talking about the change in the incarceration age, please speak with your students about the fact that that's not perhaps an ongoing effect of dispossession on spirituality, but it may be a relevant example when we're talking about reconciliation and changing the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australia.
And it might be the quote that makes the point, and saying that it's about the incarceration age gives that quote some credence or gives it some context.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. We're coming up to time now. As I said, we have been recording this evening. So for those who came in a little bit later, we will edit out just the start as we were still bringing people in. And then we'll share this with you from tomorrow, and the link will be included on our Facebook page. Thank you once again, and please do look out on our Facebook page for the information. We'll be doing this again next week with a different presenter and looking at chipping away at questions, understanding exactly what's being asked in a question and planning a response, particularly with some of our extended responses. Thanks again, everyone, and good night.
Bye.